Yeah. Don't my Oreo.
Okay, good.
Do we
really know what happened? The brother did.
The brother. That's what I thought too.
I mean, that seems like kind of obvious.
Hey, do you want to talk about death?
Yeah.
Welcome to Mystery
Murdery thingy.
Welcome to Mystery Murdery thingy. Welcome to Okay, I'll stop. Mysteries.
Who are
We
you?
do mysteries. I'm Mario.
Who are you?
I'm Mario.
I'm Chloe. I'm trying to be charming and it's just not working.
Don't try. Don't try so hard.
Okay.
That's my advice. That's what Ellen would say.
We stan Ellen.
Yep.
Anyway.
Good intro. So I'm gonna go first this week.
Yay.
Yay. And I'm gonna do a part 2, like I said, I was gonna do.
Okay,
so,
this is gonna be nuts. I'm excited.
More crazy shit that the Central Intelligence Agency was getting up to over the years. They're a pretty crazy organization, you know, all of the crazy crap that they've done. I don't know if you know about it.
Does the
you've heard about this, if you know about this.
know about them?
About what they're doing?
Yeah.
That is a matter of great contention, I would say, and one which actually will play into the second one I'm going to do today. But I would say probably not. Probably the president is not aware of everything that they're doing. Because, yes, there are sort of rogue operations, one might say, within the CIA that have occurred over the years, you know, in which only a few people, you know, were involved. Or because you have to understand we talk about, like, the different types of intelligence, right? The CIA is very much involved in human, as they say, human intelligence. So,
okay.
Part of what they do is develop sources, right? That's sort of the euphemism for it, which is to say they get people to become spies for them, turncoats, traitors, double agents. They, for example, a really good example of this actually is in Nicaragua, in Central America, where the CIA made contact with a certain Manuel Noriega well before he became the famous Manuel Noriega, the colonel, you know, dictator of Nicaragua, when he was simply Manuel Noriega, the military student. They made contact with him. He became a CIA source. You know, 15, 20 years later, he's leading the country as its brutal military dictator who
Does the
was
CIA
helped.
have anything to do with that?
Yes, I was going to say who was helped to get there by the CIA. So now,
that's nice.
Worked out pretty well for the CIA, right? You know, but that's how they work. It's not a good thing. I'm being sort of facetious.
Tell us some stories.
But that's not like one of the ones I'm going to do today. But there are so many more. I'm not going to do even half of the ones that are out there, right? Because I did 3 last week. I'm going to do 2 this week. Just know, like, if you want to continue to dig into all the fucked up shit having to do with the CIA, there's a lot more to dig into. So what I was going to talk about that actually at the beginning. So I talked about Allen Dulles, right, the CIA director in the 50s, who was, you know, very very much into these sort of interventionist misadventures. Is a word that I feel like I need to keep saying surrounding these. I like that word, misadventures.
Misadventure. Death by misadventure.
Yeah, exactly. In different parts of the world. And apparently he had like a sort of a target list of leaders that he felt needed to be taken out, right?
Oh my God.
Mainly, as you know, we talked about last week, because they're seen as being too close to the Soviet Union, too close to the communists, tipping in that direction.
I feel like that's psychopathic.
Well, I mean, if you had a list of people who you were going to murder, then yes. If you're the leader of an intelligence organization and you have a list of, you know, intelligence targets, I think it's less so. But the fact that it was essentially a kill list. Yes, it is maybe a little tiny bit psychopathic. I don't know. Maybe. Can't psychoanalyze Alan Dulles from beyond the grave, I suppose. But according to him, his main targets were, as we talked about last week, Mohammad Mossadegh in Iran. Also, I guess it's Jacobo Arbenz in Guatemala. Of course, Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, who's the taking out of him, sort of fomented the whole Vietnam War, right?
Yeah.
Or at least that was, a big part of it. Sukarno in Indonesia, of course, as we talked about last week as well. One I'm going to talk about this week, Patrice Lumumba in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as it's currently known, and Fidel Castro, of course, in Cuba. And just as a side note, I thought about talking about this, but it's kind of too much to get into. The number of different attempts that the CIA and the United States made to try to assassinate Fidel Castro is astounding. There were tens, dozens of different schemes and plots to assassinate Castro, including literally an exploding cigar. Fucking Bugs Bunny cartoon. Yes. That was a scheme that the CIA came up with, I believe.
That's insane.
Yeah. So there's all that. And of course that was secret for a long
fucking
time.
Bugs Bunny fucking Looney Tunes.
It was literal Looney Tunes in that instance. And of course, the Bay of Pigs and all that stuff. There's a lot you could say about Cuba.
Cuba.
And there's a lot you can say about a lot of countries, because according to this author of the audiobook that I listened to, Stephen Kinzer, the CIA has been involved in no fewer than 14 of these misadventures around the world throughout the years. He sort of has a different way of counting them perhaps than I would, or maybe the common sense way of going about it would be. He only counts ones wherein the U.S. made a decisive, was the decisive factor in the coup, in the taking out, the assassination, what have you, whatever happened. So this leaves out some, I think even one or two that I talked about last week, but also includes other ones like Hawaii, that I wouldn't necessarily talk about, because that's actually... The intervention in Hawaii is it starts pre-CIA.
Okay.
Because the U.S. involvement in Hawaii goes back to the late 19th century. Even though the Queen didn't end up getting deposed until much later. So anyway, just to give you kind of an idea of the scope of what we're looking at here, right? But what I am going to start with. Before I get into Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, is just a couple of terms to kind of lay a framework here. I feel like I need to kind of take a little bit of a step back and lay out where all of this is coming from, right? Because I think you've been struck many times throughout my reading about, telling you about all this shit that the CIA has done, what the fuck? They did this? Where is this coming from? Why are they doing all this, right? So some of the precursors to what we're talking about here, specifically two terms. So first, the Monroe Doctrine. You may remember this if you ever took AP U.S. history, right?
Yes.
So or even just regular U.S. history.
Yeah, I wasn't smart enough to take APUSH.
I took APUSH.
I didn't want to take
Only got a 4. Only got a 4. At Davidson, you had to get a 5 dev credit, which I thought was dumb. But anyway. So the Monroe Doctrine. This is the notion proposed by, of course, President James Monroe on December 2nd, 1823. I believe it was his 7th address to the Congress that basically established 2 zones of influence. The old world, right, Europe over there, Africa, and the new world, the United States, Canada, South America, the Caribbean, all the stuff over here. And he said, okay, we're not going to have this stuff anymore where the European countries come over here and have colonies in the New World and exert influence here. It's just, it's not going to happen anymore because the United States is going to stop it. All of this now is our zone of influence, right? So if there is a particular, mining that we want to do or a tract of land that looks really, particularly, attractive, we're the ones that are going to get to steal it. So, we're calling this, right? Okay. It's not exactly that, but you know what I mean. If there's going to be any sort of, power land grabs, it's going to be us who are going to be doing them here in this part of the world. And we'll leave you alone over there too. We're not going to go and try to, take anything. We sort of had our little foothold, with Liberia was set up, mainly with the help of returned people from the United States who had, been taken over themselves or whose, recent ancestors had to be slaves in the United States. That was kind of how part of how Liberia was set up, but also with the help and with the money of the, sort of progressive for their time organizations who were involved in this, right? So that it seems weird now, but that was actually a progressive idea at the time, was to have all the slaves and the descendants of slaves go back to Africa.
So that's part of the Monroe Doctrine?
Doesn't really have too much with the Monroe Doctrine except to say that, we're going to stay out of Africa for the most part. Sorry, I kind of got off on a tangent there. I get a little excited when I'm talking about history. So I'm kind of a nerd. I don't know if you knew that. Maybe you did. Not sure. Okay.
News to me.
Yeah. So, yeah, this was really one of the big organizing principles of American foreign policy, just moving forward, but especially over the course of the next century or so, at least through kind of the Reagan administration. This was a very strong part of our policy. And what sort of changed it a little bit in 1804 was the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. And this was added by, of course, President Teddy Roosevelt. And this stated that the U.S. would intervene in conflicts on behalf of European colonial powers. So essentially what he was saying was that this was going to cut out those European meddlers and install the U.S. as a sort of de facto international police power in our Western Hemisphere. So if European powers, we were going to take, actual proactive action to stop them from, setting up, sort of colonialization in the Western Hemisphere.
So if they wanted to colonize, Jamaica or something,
Sure.
Then the U.S. would be like, no, this is we're going to do that instead.
Exactly. And a good example of this, would be the Spanish-American War, where, we fought over Cuba. And it was literally that, exact circumstance, right? There was a Cuban uprising, which, I'm sorry, I'm not like a historian. I think this is how it worked. I'm kind of talking out of my ass here, but whatever. That there was this sort of uprising in Cuba, that the Spanish government lost its footing. So the United States took advantage of that, said, okay, we're going to go in and push this colonial power out, partly because of things like the Monroe Doctrine, and partly also because, it was advantageous. It was politically advantageous at the time for the people who were doing it, which is usually part of this kind of thing as well. And we actually could have taken Cuba, that it could have become essentially what Puerto Rico is, but we chose not to. And it's kind of funny the way that our relationship with these different places ended up being different. I'm doing all this stuff about foreign interventions, right, over the course of these 2 weeks, just taking kind of a higher view look of the United States and foreign interventions. It's extremely variegated in terms of the outcomes and the intentions of what we were doing at any given time, partly because the U.S. has this tendency to swing back and forth, right? So we had a president who really wanted us to become involved and then we had like a president who like didn't at all want to become involved.
And so these are our like government like secrets and shit, right?
Well, a lot of this was secret at the time, and that's part of what I'm going to talk about as well. So this first one, it was definitely kept secret for a long time, and it's our involvement in, like I talked about before, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which at the time was called the Republic. It gets kind of confusing. At first, it was called Republic of the Congo, which is a different country now, which is right next to the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay.
So what I'm talking about is...
So there's the DRC and the RC.
Right, this is the DRC.
And you're talking about the DRC.
This is the DRC, right.
Got it.
And in the late 1950s, up until very early 1960, it was led...
Everything happened in the 50s. Sorry.
A lot, almost all of what I'm going to talk about is
what
yes,
what was going on? Were we just nuts?
The CIA was feeling very empowered because, we were coming out of World War II.
Yeah. Right.
So there was a transition, right? We're going out of a hot war build up footing, right? Where we were doing aluminum drives and things, right? To a situation in which we were in a Cold War. So now we're not putting all of our energy. The star of the show now, right, is not the infantry or the Air Force. Now it's the spies because it's a Cold War, right? It's not about, taking 10,000 troops to land on some beach in Normandy, right? It's about sending out 100 spies to find out what the enemy's doing. It's about creating the U-2 spy plane, like I talked about with the Area 51 episode, right? It was basically at the same time. So these kind of covert actions. Right. These missions impossible, if you will, were, this was sort of their heyday in a sense.
Okay, the DRC.
Yes. So in the DRC, the leader, the first leader, the George Washington of the Congo, if you will, was Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba. And the CIA was involved in a plot to assassinate him. So, which will not surprise you at this point, right? Because that's what we're fucking talking about. So,
because we're bored or what? I guess you're going to explain that. Okay.
I'll explain that. And this was, by no means the only... covert action that the CIA was involved in what is now the DRC. In fact, this was taken together the largest covert mission that the CIA had been engaged with up until that point. So as we're talking about, as we're going through the 50s, right, we talked about our involvement in Iran in 1953, our involvement in Guatemala in 1954. Right. Things are just sort of building up to this point now where we're being involved in the Congo. So, of course, handing out bags of cash, because that is what the CIA is fucking good at. They are good at being a very bad bank in the sense that the banks are supposed to keep money in and they let money out.
And they just, yep.
Sorry, that was one of those jokes where I have to over-explain it while I'm telling it.
Yeah.
It's my particular brand of humor. Thank you very much. Of course, propaganda, they're setting up their radio stations. Again, we've heard these kind of things before. Distributing leaflets, partly with, misinformation. And they arranged to have a vote of no confidence in the Congolese Senate to try to oust Lumumba by political means first. Because there was actually a lot of resistance within the CIA and the National Security Council, the NSC, to this notion of assassinating Lumumba.
So they did it a different way before actually going for, the kill.
Right. They tried to sort of take him out in a different way. And this notion of how they're supposed to take him out, whether they're supposed to take him out, this is kind of the mystery of this one. is the questions kind of surrounding intention and what was supposed to happen and who gave the order
motive.
and the motive exactly. So Lumumba was one of the founders of the Congolese state after it gained independence from Belgium in 1960, when the early Congolese state was being harassed by Belgian-connected rebels in one of the breakaway provinces. Lumumba asked for help from the U.S. and from the UN. They turned him down, so he turned to the Soviet Union for assistance, for arms and help, logistical help. And this created a big rift with the United States, obviously, right? Like, we talked about, everything at this point was, are you moving into the sphere of influence? It's all about spheres of influence, right? Are you moving into the Soviet sphere of influence or our sphere of influence?
We turned him down.
I know. And there I don't know, there's certain things, if you like I said, I listened to that audiobook, which was called Overthrown by Stephen Kinzer, and this is not the only time this happens where there's a person who seems like they should be a natural ally of the United States, and for whatever reason, just interpersonally, they don't get along with the people in the government, our government, with whom they would need to get along, and therefore tragic history ensues. Or at least that's the way people like Stephen Kinzer put it. I don't know. Obviously they're creating narratives, but there's something to that, I think. That there's a deficiency. Maybe it's a deficiency in the intelligence itself, which was definitely the case partly with Lumumba, where they thought that he was sort of about to jump into the arms of the Soviet Union, whereas we found out later on through
that he wasn't?
More intelligence that he was not. That he was...
so yeah, tragic... What did you say? Tragic what ensues?
Tragic history ensues, I think I said. I'm not sure.
Both of us forgot already.
I don't know. I'm just riffing, I'm just riffing here. So, yeah, there was also this long secret memo that was found, which was written on February 14th, Valentine's Day.
Yes.
So cute.
Yes.
1972, detailing a plot to assassinate Lumumba using poison. This is really crazy. So apparently the CIA's top scientist talked to, I guess, this lab that the military has where they just have, like, diseases. I don't know. I assume it's where they, like, are trying to come up with cures for the diseases, but in this instance, that was not what this was going to be used for at all. It was going to be used to assassinate this
that's
leader.
Messed up.
So yeah, they were planning on using essentially biological warfare to take out this African leader
God.
in Congo. And I guess part of why they wanted to do this was because the disease would be, endemic to that area of Africa. So essentially, it would cover the tracks, right? Oh, he didn't get assassinated; he died of whatever.
Oh, okay.
So it would cover. The CIA wouldn't.
I hate to say it, but
pretty clever, right?
It's pretty clever.
It did not, however, end up coming to be, because before they could really take this sort of decisive action, Lumumba was forced out of office, arrested, and executed. So,
why?
Well, because he was making trouble for the, Belgian connected rebels in some of the breakaway provinces, basically. Because he wouldn't kind of play ball with the Belgians who were still very much involved in the country, trying to exert their influence. So eventually he was executed by a firing squad with absolutely no trial or anything on January 17th, 1961, at the age of 35.
Oh my God.
Yeah, by separatists in Katanga province. The Katangan officials said that he had escaped and been killed by some Congolese tribesmen, but a UN investigation concluded that was not at all the case, rather that he was murdered with the involvement, perhaps, of Belgian mercenaries under the order of his longtime nemesis Moise Tshombe soon after he arrived in Katanga province after having been arrested.
Describe my face right now.
I would say baffled, dumbfounded.
This is like a straight up movie.
Yeah, and there was a different thing that I was listening to where they were talking about how it sort of reads like a spy novel.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of this stuff kind of does. So one of the big mysteries in all of this, right, is what did he know and when did he know it, right? And what did he order in terms of President Eisenhower, who was the president at this particular time. So this happened like right at the end of the Eisenhower administration, right before JFK was going to take office. So whether President Eisenhower actually gave an order to have Lumumba assassinated is kind of unclear. So there's this thing called the Church Committee. There was a committee in the U.S. Senate, I believe it had like 7 members or something, that from the mid-'70s brought info about this operation to light. So this is like about 15 years later. They did a lot of interviews, including with a guy who worked at the White House who was in meetings about, this situation. And what he said essentially was that Eisenhower said things that could have been interpreted as either being, let's take him out politically or let's take him out, let's take him out.
Okay. Okay.
So again, it comes back to this question of, what is the action that we want to take to remove this person from office? Kind of vague, exactly like you were saying. But I guess, and he kind of went back and this, I don't remember this guy's name, but he kind of went back and forth on this. But at least some of the time he believed that it was fairly clear that Eisenhower was essentially telling them, like, if you want to bump this guy off, go ahead and bump him off. So maybe he never said, I want you to, I acknowledge, and he never maybe wrote on a piece of paper or signed, I acknowledge, that this is whatever legal or whatever for you to do this, but, the people who did it seem to think that they had the blessing of the man at the top. So I think that's kind of how that goes.
Dangerous.
Yeah,
it's a dangerous situation.
It's a dangerous game you play when you start getting into this sort of game of assassinations. So the CIA still denies involvement in this episode, but documents have come out that corroborate their ties to this assassination plot. And in addition to that plot, right, which did not come to pass with the poison and all that crazy shit, although he did fly on a plane with the the disease rather, from the United States to the Congo, as it was called at that time.
But it was never like administered or. Oh.
No, he literally threw it into the Congo River. Because he said that it was too old or something, which I did not understand because it's like a deadly disease, and he just threw it into a river, I guess.
But he didn't know what it was.
Oh no, he knew what it was. This was the top scientist from the CIA. He was the guy who was going to handle it.
Oh, I thought you meant
Lumumba.
I thought he was the one who threw it away.
Oh no! It never came.
What?
It never got close to Lumumba.
I understand.
Right. So in addition to that, it seems that the CIA was also involved in what did actually kill Lumumba, in the sense that they created kind of this permission structure, right, within the political context of the Congo, wherein Lumumba could be taken down and killed by his political enemies. But whether they were exactly involved in his shooting that night, it's still very much a mystery. So that part of it we don't really know. Whether the CIA was in contact with the Katangan rebels, or which they totally could have, because again the Danish or the Belgians were, and we were at least we had, contacts with the Belgian secret services as well. So who knows? Could be. So in hindsight, though, as I was mentioning earlier, Lumumba was not really, gonna turn commie, probably. That's what it seems like. Rather, he was committed to a sort of Pan-African nationalism that was sort of antithetical to communism. This is the idea that these African nations should all, be peacefully kind of banding together in the sort of organizations that we see today, where they have these different, regional organizations that try to, do good stuff and create more stability and security for their people. Okay, so part of the motive for the CIA doing this kind of stuff may also have been to appease the Belgians, who had colonized, the Congo before and really, really did not like Lumumba.
Okay, so were they, also gaining power at that point?
No, the Belgians were losing power. They essentially lost control of the country in 1960 when it gained independence, but, they weren't oh, okay, we're just going to go back to Belgium then, cool. That's totally fine. No, they stuck around in a lot of the bases that they had there and just refused to leave, which, by the way, also happened to us. After the War of Independence, the British refused to leave a lot of bases that they had in, the north and stuff and near the Canadian border.
Okay, so that's what's kind of sort of happening here.
As well as the Belgians, not only were they doing that, but they were also fomenting these rebel, groups in, the Katanga province and other provinces who wanted to break away, from the national government in Kinshasa, or what was called Leopoldville at that time, the capital of Congo. So the purported reason for the assassination, though, was, like I said, Lumumba's, purported communist leanings. They didn't want, quote, another Cuba, according to Lawrence Devlin, the CIA station chief in Kinshasa. So they thought that it was going to turn the way of Cuba, which did, succumb to a rebel group that was aligned with communism, with the Soviet Union.
Okay.
So they didn't want that to happen in Congo. However, in hindsight, the intelligence shows that Lumumba was not going to do that at all, really. And another aspect of all of this that I haven't really touched on too much, but Stephen Kinzer in that book really kind of hammers on quite a bit, is this idea that a lot of this was to do with natural resources as well. In Congo specifically, the U.S. wanted to protect large, strategically important uranium deposits, including uranium that we had used in the Manhattan Project, actually, which I didn't know. So we were also kind of afraid that was going to fall into Soviet hands. So apparently that was part of the justification here. But, all of that being said, Lumumba, his sort of idealistic vision for his country has, kind of persisted down to today. Like I said, he's kind of basically their George Washington. And like so many of the CIA misadventures, the removal of this democratically elected leader seems to have had pretty ill consequences, at least as bad as good, I would say. Even if the CIA's short-term goal was achieved, which it undoubtedly was, but probably didn't turn out that great. Just kind of look at what's happened in the DRC for the entire history up until now. Where I think it's a little bit better there now in the past couple of years. I don't really remember, but still pretty bad, right? Okay, so moving on. This one is not from the 1950s, so...
Okay.
There's that, I guess.
Okay.
Fast forwarding to the mid-1970s, late 1970s, 1980s. So I'm going to talk about Iran-Contra, which I think I'd mentioned to you that I was going to talk about as well.
Okay.
So I talked about the
Iran-Contra Affair.
The Iran-Contra Affair, exactly, as it's popularly known. I guess it's also called Iran-Gate. I've never heard that before.
Why is that just used all the time? Something gate.
Because of Watergate. But no real reason, just because of that. I don't know.
Well, why was it called Watergate?
Because that's I'm assuming, name of the person who owned it. I mean, it's a hotel, so I don't know. So anyway, the Church Committee, right, that was looking into all of this, detailed the CIA misadventures, up until the mid-70s. However, this does not seem to have chastened the CIA too much because they were then involved in one of the biggest political scandals of the past 50 years.
Oh, wow.
After the Church Committee and after the Congress had specifically passed laws to try to stop them from doing the exact things that they then did. in the Iran-Contra affair. Like, I want to make it clear from the outset, Congress passed a specific law with an amendment that specifically was trying to stop the government from supporting the Contras in Nicaragua, and they just completely ignored that and found some real shady ways to get around it. So the involvement, this whole thing, right, the Iran-Contra affair, centers around the involvement of American support for the so-called Contras, a rebel force in Nicaragua fighting against the Sandinista government. So Sandinista comes from Sandino, who was a leader in Nicaragua that we helped to take out, of course, because that's all.
Because there's another one. There's always
another one.
There's always a connection.
And I'm not even going to talk about that. But just so you understand, that's where it comes from. And the Sandinista government was, they were actually, had sort of leanings toward communism. So great. So I guess it was all...
It was justified.
It was all totally justified.
Everything was fine. It
was fine.
A-okay.
Whole thing. So America began secretly supporting the Contra rebels under the Carter administration. However, the really crazy stuff didn't start until Reagan. Ronald Reagans, as he's called in a particular Frank Zappa song. Under Ronald Reagan, the CIA secretly funneled arms and cash to the Contras, while the president actively misled Congress about this. And they got around that congressional, act that I was talking about earlier, so also got around, of course, any budgeting restrictions because, as we know, Congress controls the purse in the United States.
Yep.
They control the spending. Ideally, that's how it's supposed to work. The White House got around this by selling arms to Iran at a substantial premium, even though there was also an arms embargo on Iran after the Islamic Revolution of 1979, that ironically, at the same exact time that the United States was secretly selling arms to Iran, U.S. diplomats were, quote from Wikipedia, lecturing other nations about how morally wrong it was to sell arms to, wait for it, Iran. So
this is not only super illegal, but incredibly ironic and like
just the non-pareil of hypocrisy. It's almost beyond words how it would be like if right now the Trump administration was like secretly selling uranium to Iran. That would be the equivalent of it, so that they could send it to rebels in Venezuela or something.
Oh my God.
that would, just think about it in the modern context, like how insane would that? That's what was happening. So not only were they doing one thing that was illegal, but in order to facilitate that illegal thing, they did a different thing that was illegal. so they could make money for the other illegal thing.
Logic. It's just so logical.
It's pretty great. You know, it's not too bad. Okay, so the plot, this whole thing, right, was mainly led by two guys, but the one that kind of comes out of it is Lieutenant Colonel Oliver Ollie North. And whether Reagan was fully aware of what North and others in the National Security Council and the CIA were doing, that's sort of the main mystery that comes out of this one. That's still hotly debated up until today. There are people on both sides that would vehemently argue whether Ronald Reagan knew or didn't know what was going on. He said that he did not. But obviously not everyone believes him. Documents about the scandal were also withheld or destroyed, including by Oliver North and his secretary Fawn Hall, who also ended up being indicted. So that whole thing, you know, where they destroy these documents makes it also a little harder to know, you know, what actually went on in this whole thing. The plot was, however, unearthed when a plane carrying arms to Nicaragua was shot down. The pilot survived. However, the pilot also implicated the CIA. So basically said, like, yeah, I was flying an arms shipment for the CIA. And then it all kind of came out.
Oh, God.
It was also detailed in a Lebanese magazine around the same time. So they were sort of mutually reinforcing. Reagan was essentially cleared for lack of evidence by a Reagan-appointed commission called the Tower Commission. So take that for what you will. It not dispositive, I would say. 14 administration officials, however, were eventually held to some sort of account for this. 11, wow. Well, you say that, but just wait a second. So 11 were eventually convicted. However, some of those convictions were eventually vacated or overturned on appeal, and all of the rest of them were pardoned by President George H.W. Bush, the recently late President George H.W. Bush, at the end of his term, at like the very end of his term.
So
he pardoned people like Ollie North. The end of his term would have been 1991 going into 1992, depending on, you know, if it was like January, the first couple of weeks in January, right, before the switchover. This thing, right, the pardoning may also have been done, some people are saying, may also have been done to protect his own involvement, George H.W. Bush's own involvement in the scandal. But again, that's a mystery. He says that he was not at all involved. He says that he was, quote, out of the loop. Who's to say? I don't know. Also, some of the mystery around this one kind of centers around when the Iranian arms sales began. The official government line, even after they sort of fessed up, right, was that the Iranian arms sales began in 1985, but evidence points to it actually beginning in 1981. And this is important because it goes to what was their initial justification for the arms sales, which was that it was an arms for hostage situation. So what I didn't mention was that there were these hostages being held by Iran that we were secretly trying to get away from them with this arms sale thing as well, which sort of worked and sort of didn't. They let 3 of them go, but then they took 3 more. So it didn't like really end up being that great for us in that respect either. So whatever Ronald Reagan's actual role, you know, in this whole thing, his popularity, which severely tanked right when this happened, completely recovered by the end of his presidency, to the point where he was actually more popular at the end of his presidency than he had been throughout his entire presidency. So he completely was, you know, vindicated, at least in the eyes of his admirers and apologists, right? Not everyone, but a lot of people. And it's interesting to contrast, not to get too political, Reagan's stance and his actions vis-a-vis the investigation. You know, for example, you know, volunteering documents, volunteering to create a commission, as opposed to what Donald Trump is doing right now, where he's like obstructing the investigation.
Oh, okay.
Not wanting to give up information, saying that, we shouldn't have any investigation at all. It's just interesting to look at how, Ronald Reagan, for whatever you may think about his actual involvement in it, he handled that part of it pretty well. And I think that's part of why he came out kind of smelling like daisies, because people figured, I think, hey, he didn't seem to be trying to hide anything. Maybe he just did a really good job of hiding stuff, but, he didn't make it seem that way. So, anyway, okay, so my opinions on the mysteries, right, that we've detailed today. I think if you recall back to the beginning, Eisenhower probably did order the killing of Lumumba. I think that seems like pretty clear, even if it was kind of in a roundabout way, by insinuation. And I think it wouldn't be the only time that we've ever seen a world leader do something like that.
He either meant it or he meant it.
Yeah, so maybe it was misinterpreted, but, that's part of what they say may have been the case with this whole Jamal Khashoggi killing. Maybe MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, said Saudi Arabia Crown Prince, maybe he, hinted or insinuated, we've got to take this guy out or something, right? You don't have to say it necessarily. So I don't know if Eisenhower, again, was like, hey, I want you to go, kill this guy with a rare African disease.
So it could have been a mistake.
Or maybe it was what he meant and he just wanted plausible deniability, which is always kind of a thing in these kind of operations as well. So anyway, it also seems clear in hindsight, again, that Lumumba was not leading his country, toward a Soviet-style communist regime. That was not the case. And I come down on the side, in terms of the second mystery, that Reagan probably was in some way involved in the Iran-Contra affair. It seems exceedingly unlikely to me that Ollie North and Poindexter and these other people were involved in this like multinational scheme involving a country that we had these, sanctions on, and also what was kind of Reagan's pet project was with the Contras. Reagan loved the Contras. He praised the Contras. He forgave them for all of their human rights abuses. So the notion that he wouldn't have been involved in a thing that's centered around the Contras seems kind of far-fetched to me. But we'll probably never really know. But I think George H.W. Bush, I think it's perfectly plausible that he may actually have been out of the loop, as he said. So that's what I think. Okay, so my sources.
Wow.
Again, that book Overthrow by Stephen Kinzer, a review of a different book by Stephen Kinzer called The Brothers. The review was written by Adam Labor in the New York Times. Of course, wonderful Wikipedia. The CIA activities in the DRC page, Patrice Lumumba page, and the Iran-Contra Affair page, among others. An article called Patrice Lumumba, The Most Important Assassination of the 20th Century by Georges Nzogala Ntalaja. David Rabarge, an article by him in the Studies in Intelligence from September 2014. An article called The CIA and Lumumba from the New York Times archive from August 2nd, 1981. A History.com article about the Iran-Contra affair, and various BBC4 Alastair Cook Letter from America programs.
BBC.
Love the BBC. And I also listened to and watched the speech that President Reagan gave about the Iran-Contra affair at the time that it was happening. So that was mine for this week.
That was really good.
Thanks.
Okay.
You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Let's talk about the poisoning of Patsy Wright. So, Patsy Wright was 43 years old when she died. She was blonde, vibrant, quote, a head turner. So her like big hobby was cutting horses, which I didn't know what that was. It is an equestrian competition that demonstrates a horse's athleticism and ability to handle cattle. So it's like it's like a performance. I think it's if I remember, it's like a 2.5 minute like little like run, and then you get judged. And so that was her hobby. She owned horses. She bred horses. She grew up in Highland Park, Texas. She was the niece of House Speaker Sam Rayburn. She owned 2 of her own horses, and she was preparing to move to a new 30-acre ranch in Aledo, Texas. So Patsy is easily a millionaire. She is the co-owner of the Wax Museum of the Southwest.
That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So it's owned by her and her sister, Sally Horning, and it was originally founded by her father. Okay. I'm trying not to make this page turning like super loud.
I am the father.
Okay. October 22nd, 1987. In the middle of the night, Patsy, she's restless. She can't go to sleep. So she takes a dose of NyQuil, which is normal for her. It's something that she did often if she couldn't sleep.
But we should say not probably recommended.
This is also the late 80s.
Okay. It probably says like specifically on the label not to do shit like that.
Maybe.
Okay.
No victim blaming.
Sorry.
According to, also I haven't really like made clear that she's a victim yet.
Okay.
So according to
Is it still early enough on in the story that I can make dumb jokes? Have we gotten past that point?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Go on.
Okay.
Super serial. Okay.
According to the police report, shortly before 3 a.m., Patsy called her sister Sally. Her brother-in-law, Steve, answered the phone. Patsy asks for Sally. She says, I've taken some NyQuil and something's really, really wrong. So they called the police, but Patsy was in the process of moving at this time. And so she was in a rental house and they didn't know the address. So they couldn't get...
Oh, shit.
They couldn't, like, tell the dispatcher to send people out there.
Right.
So Sally and her brother-in-law, Steve, they hopped in the car. They made their way over there. The front door was locked and the spare keys were missing. So they kind of had to break in. So Steve crawls through a small bedroom window. He opens, and then he like gets in, and then he opens the front door to let Sally in. And they both noticed that the burglar alarm wasn't set because Patsy had put one in after someone had broken several windows. So she was already being cautious. Nothing was missing. So Patsy was found unresponsive. They called the paramedics once they got there. So Steve told police that he moved a table with 2 plates on it away from the bed in order to do CPR. And once the EMTs got there, there really wasn't much they could do. Patsy had no pulse, no blood pressure, and her eyes were beginning to dilate. She was rushed to the hospital, but it was eventually declared dead at 4:15 a.m. The police picked up a bottle of NyQuil and put it in the evidence bag. They kept it.
Right.
8 days after her death. So she died, and the autopsy didn't really show anything.
There were no signs of trauma.
No, exactly. Until 8 days after her death, when the blood and tissue samples came back.
Right.
The test results found strychnine.
Oh.
Which is very rare. So they tested the NyQuil then, which also turned up positive for strychnine.
Of course.
So let's talk about strychnine.
Okay.
It's called the lover's poison.
Because I've heard of it, but I don't know too much about it.
So only about...
Oh, that's cute. The lover's poison.
Yes.
Aw.
Cute, right?
Yeah.
So only about 100 companies in the U.S. Sell it or use it. So it's actually rarely seen in homicide. So this was surprising. It's used to kill coyotes, gophers, rats, and like other pests, and
Kill the gophers.
and even in that form.
Well, I mean, I tell you though, if I kill all the gophers, aren't they going to put me away for?
What is that for? I have no idea what you're referencing.
It's Caddyshack.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen Caddyshack in just forever.
Oh, okay.
So even that form of strychnine used to kill pests and stuff, only 3% of it is like really used in it. So this stuff is strong.
Mm-hmm.
It's sometimes available in college chemistry labs, or it's found in the black market because people put it in drugs to like kill people, to get rid of like unwanted associates and shit like that.
Sure.
The bottle contained enough strychnine to kill 8 to 9 people.
Whoa.
There was a lot. I think
Overkill.
it said you only need like a gram to kill someone. So this is what it does to you. Within 15 minutes of ingestion, victims experience muscle twitching, a sensation of suffocation, and massive, there's an onset of convulsions. The face turns blue, the mouth contracts into a fixed grin, and death is basically caused by paralysis of the respiratory muscles. Terrifying.
Yeah.
So, investigation. Product tampering was ruled out. The lead investigator, his name is Sergeant J. Gus Gustafson, of the Arlington Police Department. He learned that Patsy was known to take NyQuil, okay? Everyone that was interviewed knew that. It was common knowledge.
Right.
So
presumably would have the person who killed her.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it had to be somebody who knew Patsy and someone who was patient and could bide their time. So a quote from Gustafson is, quote, "This isn't rage or domestic fracas. This one is just put the stuff in and walk away. They knew that sooner or later she would drink it," end quote. So this person was patient.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide was also ruled out. So what's freaky about this is that Patsy was very healthy. She was healthy. She was not under any financial strain. She was planning for the future. Even her like alarm clock went off that morning. Like she had planned. She was planning on moving. She bought a whole new property, moving to Aledo, Texas. She had a whole life in front of her. So Gustafson started interrogations, and right then and there, the family started pointing fingers at each other. It got worse after the discovery of Bill and Bonnie Alexander, who boarded Patsy's horses. So she bought horses from them, and she paid them for board and for training. And in that past few months or so, they had gotten really close over sharing their horses and stuff like that.
I could see if this were like an episode of like Dateline.
Yes.
Like you were watching with your mom.
Yeah.
I could see there being like, as they're telling me, they became very close. And it's like a montage of them like, you know, patting a horse and then like drinking a glass of wine together, you know.
Yes.
Like to show their friendship was, you know.
Exactly.
Moving beyond just the horse phase, you know.
But they discovered that Bill and Bonnie Alexander cashed a $4,000 check from Patsy. So Patsy wrote in the date and she signed the check, but the Alexanders are the ones that filled in the amount, the $4,000. Patsy asked her best friend, Karen Beatty, to liquidate some assets. And when Beatty asked about any outstanding checks that she had to look out for, Patsy didn't mention anything about this $4,000 check. The Alexanders claimed that Patsy wrote the check and told them to put in whatever she owed them for that month. That was their claim. Furthermore, her horses, those expensive horses, like 26 grand horses, were put in the Alexanders' names. So the reasoning for that, we suppose, is that Patsy didn't want her brother-in-law Steve to get his hands on her horses if something were to happen. They did not have a great relationship, Steve and Patsy,
Okay.
her brother-in-law. So they were also looking at the Alexanders because strychnine is sometimes used by horse breeders to treat animals.
Oh.
But both Bonnie and Bill passed polygraph tests. And not that that seriously means anything, but in the 80s, this was the 80s.
People still believe in them, but they haven't been admissible in court for many years.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they were ever admissible in court, actually, but because, again, it is junk. It's total junk science. Yeah.
Pseudoscience.
Yeah.
So the main suspects, Steve Horning and Bob Cox. Let's talk about Steve Horning first. So Steve is Patsy's brother-in-law. So Patsy's friends say that she thought Steve was a phony and a plastic.
He's a phony!
What's that from?
uh...
Did you just make it up?
No, from Family Guy, I think.
Terrible. That was terrible. But that's what she thought. So Steve spent all of Sally's Patsy's sister. Steve spent all of her inheritance in a few years. They went into debt, and Steve was actually a big game hunter, and he did a lot of gambling too, and that's where all the money went.
Let me just say, big game hunting is bullshit. No one needs to do that.
The article explained how in his office there was like a cougar like rug, and the interviewer was like, "Oh, where did you shoot this cougar?" And he said, "In the heart."
Fuck you, dude.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great.
Oh, I was expecting like Kenya ? Mark. Like
cool.
Oh my god. So
makes you a real man.
Gross.
Right.
Absolutely disgusting.
I know.
Sally and Patsy had a $500,000 life insurance policy on the other. So if one died, the other used the money to buy out the other's share of the wax museum. So they were the co-owners.
Right.
So they bought out the other's share if one were to die.
Oh, okay.
Making the other one sister the sole owner. Then the sister's heir would split that $500,000.
See. So this is where the brother-in-law...
This is where the brother-in-law comes in.
He's tipping the dominoes over till it gets to him. Okay.
Right. Patsy wanted to change it. She wanted to change it because the museum stock price was growing from when they signed it.
Who doesn't love a good wax museum?
Right? And
You know.
in Texas, is that a big thing in the South? I feel like it's a big thing in the South.
You know, it's like going to Madame Tussauds in Las Vegas. It's like, how do they keep it so cool? It's so high here. Why don't the wax melt?
What?
I gotta see. It's crazy.
Is it like really cold in there?
I mean, they have to keep it pretty cool so the wax doesn't melt. I don't know. There was some joke about it being hot and wax melting in there somewhere. I don't know. Something.
So Patsy wanted, she wanted to change it because the museum stock value was going up, and I am gesturing.
Right.
Up.
Good. That's good.
And Sally was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh, no.
In the fall of 1985. So she was like, let's change this.
Yeah.
So if Sally died, then Steve, he'd get $500,000.
Right, of course.
So Sally went through chemo and was declared in remission that summer. But both Patsy and Sally they agreed that it should be changed. They scheduled a meeting, but Patsy was killed 2 weeks before that meeting.
Ooh.
So the policy went into effect. Under community property laws, Steve has claimed 25% of the museum stock. So they're setting up a will now that gives their children, Leslie and Wayne, the museum if Steve or Sally dies. So if Sally dies before Steve, then Steve will own a controlling share of the stock, which is exactly what Patsy was trying to prevent.
Right.
So the question here is that, did Steve poison Patsy for the money? Did he do it for the museum? In 1970, he was arrested and charged with assaulting a woman.
If I was talking to him, if I was interrogating him, I'd probably like ask him that. I'd be like,
Would you like
hey,
slam your hand on the table?
Did you kill her for the money?
Did you do it for the museum?
Did you kill her for the museum?
Are you here for the wax?
Are you just into wax?
Is it for the glory?
Why did you kill her?
In 1970, he was arrested and charged with assaulting a woman, but the charges were dropped. So
he doesn't seem like a good dude. I don't know.
He doesn't, but neither does Patsy's ex-husband, Bob Cox.
Oh, he's
this
the other.
This dude's creepy. He's
the
the other
other
main
okay.
suspect. So he also owned a wax museum in Grand Prairie, Texas.
What?
So he wasn't just a guy who owned a wax museum. He was an investor.
Now I'm not
just
a guy who owns a wax museum. I
He
just wanted to know.
he was
Got many fine holdings.
Well, he was an investor, and he
Sure.
bought and sold many companies. Him and his wife Emily. So the State Fair of Texas canceled his lease after a rough year of the wax museum. Didn't have such a great year, so he had to sell it.
So his wax museum was not doing well.
Not doing well. So he calls up.
That's interesting because the other wax museum was doing well.
Doing great. So he calls up Patsy and Sally.
Wax museum market is very complicated.
Yes.
In Texas.
I just feel like it's a big thing. So he called Patsy and Sally, some fellow wax museum owners, like, hey,
Sure.
are you guys interested? You know, buy. So Patsy gets an appraisal on the collection. She offers $14,000. And
It's not that much.
Cox is like, what? What kind of... He's insulted. Because
that's pretty low.
He has it insured for $300,000.
Right.
But this is also 1982.
Sure.
Still not a lot.
Still not a
But
lot
he
for
has
a museum.
He has it insured so he turns it down.
Sure.
But he asks out Patsy. In the meantime, he asks her out. He was still married at this time.
I was going to say, isn't he married?
No, he was separated.
Oh.
But he was still officially married. And
Okay.
Patsy's like, you know what? Ask me when your divorce is final.
Right.
They started dating a few months later under the false pretense that he was divorced, even though he wasn't. He didn't get divorced until a couple years later, like officially. But they started dating a few months later. They quickly fell in love. February 1st, 1983. The building in Galveston, where Cox was planning to open another wax museum, caught on fire. Now, this is a big deal because Cox claims that homeless people seeking shelter set the fire, but attorneys said that Cox caused it. And so there was a trial. This is a big trial for arson. So the trial brought out that Cox and his many companies also were in financial trouble. So Patsy and Bob got married in April of 1983, and it wasn't until after the wedding that Patsy said that Bob changed. He became verbally abusive to her and her family. He became lazy and greedy. They lived off of her incomes, her earnings. So she was paying for everything. She paid for the house, utilities, food, all of it. Whoopsies. So furthermore, Cox had a gambling problem. He spent his afternoons at the Dallas Country Club, gambling everything all the time.
Nice work if you can get it, right?
Jesus.
Yeah.
My God. So
What a deadbeat.
their marriage obviously isn't going well. So Patsy calls up Emily, Bob's ex-wife, and is like, hey, help me out. And she's like, okay, here's our old marriage counselor. Why don't you go to him? And the marriage counselor is literally like, yo, Bob is a straight up sociopath. You need to lead him ASAP.
What?
Yeah.
The marriage counselor was like, you need to leave him?
Yeah, the marriage counselor said,
Wow.
this is not, you need to leave him. So in April of 1984, they separated. And then the divorce was finalized a few months later in October. So after the divorce, Cox started following her. He started following Patsy. He starts parking outside her house at night. He even put on disguises and walked around and followed her and shit. He would watch her. He threatened her. Patsy recalls that during their marriage they had conversations, and he would say stuff like that he knows people who could get anything done, and that he could get someone, quote, snuffed out and crazy shit like that. Patsy so she also got a restraining order against him after all of that. So meanwhile, Cox has this arson trial over his head. His attorney meets with Patsy about 8 to 10 times between 1986 and 1987 to talk about the value of his property, the property that they live on. So Patsy they not only talk about that, but Patsy knows she's got some dirt. So she says one of the most valuable pieces in the collection, which was some kind of antique chest, wasn't actually burned in the fire. It was never destroyed, and it was actually in Cox's office.
But he claimed it on, like, the insurance? Yeah. Okay.
So, sources say that Cox called up Patsy and was like, hey, you can't talk about it. Don't testify at my trial. Please change your testimony. And she's like, no, like, I'm telling the truth. She refused. Patsy was killed 10 days before the trial was set to take place.
It's a pretty strong motive.
Yes. There were more coincidences. So, 11 months after Patsy's death, her wax museum, the one her and her sister owned, the Wax Museum of the Southwest, burned to the ground. Arson investigators said it stemmed from the electrical box. And the insurance paid out $4 million, but it wasn't enough to replace the museum. It would have cost something like $5.5 million or something like that. So what she started rebuilding right away. She hired a wax figure maker to create 135 new pieces, and then she added a Ripley's Believe It or Not collection along with it.
So she was like, I'm not going to let this stop me. I'm going to like come back even bigger.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, especially after her sister's death. Murder. Cox won his trial.
Really? He was acquitted.
He was awarded $1.3 million. The jury could not prove that he purposely set a fire.
So he got to collect on the insurance, essentially. Okay.
Yes. He also threw a, quote, murder mystery party just a couple weeks after Patsy's death.
I feel like this kind of reminds me of, like, OJ coming out with that book. What was it called? It was like If I Did It or something like that.
Yeah, oh my, don't even get me started on that. That pisses me off.
I know.
The family hired a private investigator named Bill Deere who believes that the case can be solved. But to this day, we've really got nothing. So my questions are, did Bob Cox kill Patsy Wright to avoid her testimony, or as revenge to get money, or did her brother-in-law Steve Horning poison her for the museum and for the money? Remember, was it for the museum?
Was it for the money?
The wax. Are you in it for the wax?
I just wanted the wax.
And that is the mysterious poisoning of.
Yeah. And you said it pretty much just
Patsy
came from one
Wright.
source.
Yes, from a D Magazine article by Glenna Whitley.
Oh, okay.
I think the title was The Wax Museum Murder Mystery or something like that. The Museum of the Wax, or The Mystery of the Wax Museum. The Museum of the Wax Mystery. Museum Wax Mystery.
It sounds like a Agatha Christie novel. Right?
It does, doesn't it?
Murder in the Wax Museum. Or something. Okay, so I think it's time for some weird shit in the news. 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 Weird. Okay. So I was gonna do a few just short ones. So this one I'm gonna start with one sad one and then a couple of other more kind of funnier ones. So they're all from the AP, which has this great section called Strange. So that's where I got all my stuff from for the most part. So this is a Associated Press story titled "New Study Explains Creation of Deadly California Fire NATO." So I don't know if you heard about this. Like a tornado within a fire. So I don't know if you heard about this happening during the Camp Fire in Northern California. There was one of these that happened, and they're very, very rare. So this happens. It's a weather event that happens when you have an enormous fire, right, which creates a heavy cloud cover, which extends miles up into the atmosphere and creates an ice layer on top of it, right? So then you have this like super inversion, basically, right? So superheated air on the bottom and very cold air on the top.
And that's a tornado. Yeah.
And that's how you create a cyclone, which creates a tornado. And unfortunately, there was a firefighter that was killed by the firenado that was created within the campfire on July 26th, I believe it says. So it's very strange. In this instance, unfortunately, very tragic as well. So that's my weird / sad shit in the news.
That is
for
weird. Fire tornadoes are weird.
Very, very strange. This one, it's a bit more lighthearted, titled Leaping Lemur Surprises Florida Trooper During DUI Arrest.
Oh my
and it's
God.
pretty much just exactly what it sounds like.
Florida? Not Australia?
You've heard of Florida Man. This is Florida Lemur. The Florida Lemur surprised a Florida Highway Patrol trooper when it crawled from a trailer, being pulled by a pickup truck that had been stopped for driving erratically and hitting other cars.
Oh, geez.
So this driver, 27-year-old Shane Taylor, did warn the trooper that the lemur named Miko does bite.
Oh.
So don't get too close.
Wait, so it was the driver's lemur?
It was the driver's lemur.
What?
Not only did the driver have a lemur, but also had a tortoise, a goat, a parrot, and a wallaby.
What?
Yep, that's right. A little taste of Australia.
This is bizarre.
Down in Florida. Yes. This one file under dumbest criminals. Police, man freed from jail, steals car from its parking lot.
Jesus.
Yes, he was that dumb. So this happened in Greensburg, Pennsylvania, and according to the AP, police say a Pennsylvania man released from jail immediately stole a car from the parking lot of the jail. At the Westmoreland County Prison, officials say that moments after 36-year-old Thomas Lee Williams was released, he attacked a woman in the parking lot Tuesday evening and stole her car with the victim's 1-year-old in the back seat. Yeah.
And this dude just got out of jail? This guy's a
Moments
fucking
before.
idiot.
Moments before. Did crash about 15 minutes later, but happy to say the woman, the baby, seems like they were okay. They were taken to the hospital to be checked out, but it didn't mention any injuries or anything. Obviously, he immediately went back to jail. So that's the story of some dumb criminals.
Okay, so I only have one.
Okay, go ahead.
The title is School's Elf Murder Mystery Assignment Draws Criticism.
I would have loved this.
I thought this was funny as hell.
Yeah.
But basically, last Tuesday at Flowery Field Primary School in Hyde, England, fourth graders walked into their classroom to find a crime scene. So it was basically like a chalk outline of the elf on the shelf, and there was fake blood, and there was a crime scene tape, and it was like a writing assignment. But this one mom was contacted the school and said she was pissed, and she said, quote, "It wasn't right that she had to explain the concept of homicide to her child," end quote.
Okay. What were they? Were they like 6-year-olds? Like
They were
you gotta learn
8
sometime.
and 9-year-olds.
Yeah, it's a little young, but come on, still.
She went on to say her daughter was traumatized by the activity and had nightmares. The school has no plans to pull the detective game and even gave out a new clue this week.
Yay. Good. That's definitely overblown. So
That's it. That's the podcast.
that was a podcast. It's
Team Mystery.
It's amazingly easy to make a podcast. You should make a podcast. Everyone has a podcast nowadays. Like when I was listening to the Twit podcast, speaking of podcasts, every guest was like, oh, I also have a podcast. I was like, this is what it is.
That's what it's about.
Okay, your podcast. But thanks for listening to our podcast.
Yes.
We are definitely some of those annoying people who in a social situation will be like, oh, yeah, like on my podcast.
I don't think it's annoying. I'm for it. If you have a podcast,
Oh, yeah.
tell me about it. I want to
Definitely.
know.
Yeah, if
So-
you have a podcast, definitely email us or send us a message
Email
on
us
Instagram or
at
something.
mysterymurderythingy@gmail.com.
Or send us a Twitter.
Oh, God.
I did that for you.
Rate
But
and
you were going to talk about our Twitter.
comment on
that too.
iTunes.
Right.
Please rate and comment and subscribe.
Yeah,
That helps a lot.
definitely.
We are on Twitter.
Yes.
Please follow us on Twitter.
At Mystery Murdery.
Yes, at Mystery Murdery. I'm afraid Twitter's gonna lock us because we only have 2 followers. They're gonna be like, this is fake.
Follow us on Twitter.
Please follow us on Twitter.
So they don't kick us out.
Hit us up on Instagram, like us on
Yes.
Facebook.
Right.
It's all there.
Yeah.
On all the social medias.
That's
Maybe we'll have a
where it's
Tumblr
at.
someday.
Someday.
I hate Tumblr.
I don't know. They said you can't put porn on there anymore, so
Which,
I guess,
I mean, it's
gotta-
a bummer because Tumblr is a
something.
great platform for porn.
I don't see what the issue is. People want to look at porn on Tumblr. I don't see what the problem is.
I don't know what the issue is either.
But,
But,
anyway.
All right.
Yeah, so have a
Anywho.
great rest of your Wednesday.
yeah, guys, happy
or
Wednesday.
whatever day it is. when you're
Happy
listening.
finals week to all my college students out there. Do your thing. We believe in you.
Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. Kwanzaa, the 26th.
Merry Xmas.
Merry Christmas.
Kwanzaa.
Blessed Yule.
Eid. Eid al-Fitr.
Samhain.
Samhain, that's a
It's
good
not
one.
Samhain. It's called. That's not how it's pronounced. It's pronounced.
Oh,
something-
I have no
something
idea.
Totally different, and I don't remember what it is.
There's probably other holidays around this time.
There's so many.
Are there holiday mystery? Should we talk about a holiday mystery?
That sounds like a good idea, guys. Tune in next week for some holiday mysteries, maybe.
Is Santa real? There's a good one. I'm not sure. Right.
Me neither.
Virginia. Okay, I think we've